This episode is brought to you by WhiteHatJunior.com, the world's best one-on-one coding classes for kids between the ages of 6 and 14. White Hat Junior's unique teaching methodology makes it easy to absorb tough concepts because the teacher is able to focus completely on one student. Give it a shot. Go to userdefenders.com/WHJ to book a free coding class to see for yourself just how easy it is for your child to learn coding.
I think design skills and the software tools are table stakes. I think we can look at that through their portfolio and stuff. Having an understanding of the domain, for example. If they only live in pixels but they don't understand the business, that's really hard. You have to start. If you service a certain type of customer, having the domain knowledge saves so much time.
Welcome to the User Defenders Podcast, where we interview UX superheroes who fight for the users in order to inspire and equip you to do the same. And now, here's your host, Jason Ogle.
Well, greetings, User Defenders, and welcome to episode 74. I'm your host, Jason Ogle. Pek Pongpaet is no stranger to User Defenders, as he was a guest on episode 19 in the earlier days of the show. So I was super excited to bring Pek Pong back. See what I did there? To the show to talk specifically about the business of design. Something that many of us, and I'll raise my hand, may not get really thrilled about initially, but maybe we should. And that was really the premise of why I wanted to have this conversation with Pek. He answers questions like, why should designers understand business more? What are the benefits? How can designers influence product and business strategy and quantify their work? And this was an interesting one. How does a designer get a seat at the round table? And so much more. Thank you so much, Defender, for listening. Thank you for being here. And now please enjoy this important and value-packed episode with Pek Pongpaet. Pek Pongpaet is back with a vengeance. He's a repeat guest, and he was on episode 19. That was in the earlier days of the show. And that was probably 3 years ago or so, Pek? Was somewhere around there?
Yeah, at least.
At least, yeah, maybe longer. I'm super excited to have you back on the show. And we're going to be talking about the business of design, something that I know a lot of us designers could really get more acquainted with, let's say it that way. Because I'll raise my hand, I didn't get into this field to look at spreadsheets. I didn't get into this field just to look at data. And I didn't get into this field just to talk to executives and stakeholders. So I've been wrestling with this a lot personally, because I know that not only for designers, but for the field in general, to continue to grow and excel, I know that we do need to continue our growth trajectory, particularly around the area of business. And I had a conversation with Jeff Godhelf just recently. And one of the biggest takeaways from that conversation was him saying that we as designers really need to go all in on facilitating and learning how to run workshops, learning how to talk to executives, learning how to not just sell our work, but to talk about the business benefit of our work. So that really inspired me, Pek, and you and I have been talking about doing this even before my conversation with Jeff. So it just lit the fire again. I was like, okay, we got to do this. We got to make this happen. So I'm glad that we're here. That was a long-winded introduction, but Pek, I have a bio, and it's again from several years ago. I'm going to just touch on a few points, and you please correct me or even add on to this, okay? So
Sure.
You're the managing partner at no longer Silicon Valley based, but now Chicago based. That's a new news. More recently, just moved. So that's pretty awesome. I got a friend out there, Justin Dower, lives out there, and I ought to connect you guys. But anyway, it's called Impeccable, which I love, and inspired by your name in there. The Pek is P-E-K. They're doing awesome work. They've been doing this for a while now, so they just keep getting better and better. You had a couple fun facts last time, and I think it bears repeating that you were a motion capture model in the Mortal Kombat games. One of the things we may not see on your resume is your experience working as a stock photography model. I love that. Has iStock or Getty phoned you lately to do an appearance?
No, it's not nice. Yeah, it was like Corbis or something. Yeah. Yeah.
I love it, man. I'm sure I missed some important stuff in there because it's been a little while since we talked. So just fill in the blanks. And this is an opportunity, too, for you to give us your street cred, because some of the defenders listening might go, why should I listen to this guy? They may not have heard the other interview that we did. They may not know who you are yet. So can you fill in the blanks of the bio and then give us some of your street cred on why you're the guy to talk to about this stuff?
Sure. Well, why should you listen to me? I don't know. I know a little bit about design. I know a little bit about business. I know a little bit about starting and running companies. So 8 years ago, I started Impeccable, which is a digital product studio. I originally started in Silicon Valley, headquartered in Silicon Valley. At the time, I had transitioned from first an engineer, then a designer. So a 15-year career before starting my own business as Impeccable. And then Impeccable now is an 8-year-old company as of this month, actually.
Wow.
And for the last 3 years, we've been on the Inc. 5000, which is the list of 5,000 of the fastest growing private American companies. So we've been on that list 3 years in a row, which means we've grown and grown. And then lately, last year, we were also on the Silicon Valley's Fast Private list, which is, they have different lists, but we were on the Silicon Valley's fast growing list. And as well as we're also on Clutch as a top app development firm. So Clutch is, best call it like the Yelp of agencies. That's some of the street cred of Impeccable as a business. And then we've also won a few design awards. And we mostly service the enterprise these days. So we do design work in service to Adobe and Samsung, Panasonic. We work with Google and those type of companies. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So starting this business, and obviously taking it as far as you have, and I know you have a great team too. I know you'll be the first to say you didn't get here alone. The Avengers needed other superheroes, so did the Justice League. It's a great analogy. It still works. But obviously, you've had to really learn a lot about business, being a designer and a developer. Let's talk about why we're doing this. Like, why should designers understand business more? And what are the major benefits for them, for us, in our design career?
Sure. And there's a couple of perspectives, right? Like, even if you never decided to start your own business, I think understanding more about the business of design or where you fit into your hierarchy in the organization is useful. Yeah, let's say you work for a big company, and why is it important for designers to understand business? Is because then they'll become more valuable to that organization. And then not only that, they'll become better designers by understanding more about how they fit in, how the business works. Talking to other members in the organization will be easier because you're not just speaking the design language, you're speaking the language of business. And the best designers, we talk a lot about user experience. And when we talk about user experience, we mostly focus on the end user of our design work. But in terms of the user experience, we should think about the user experience of the people who interface with us. We're the IO, right, as designers, and how we communicate. And if we only think about it as, one analogy is like the adapters, right? Like you go to a different country and then the plug is a different kind, or if you're talking about developers, APIs. And if we only speak design speak, we're speaking a different language than other stakeholders. So we have to understand their language, their vocabulary, and what they think is important. So understanding the business needs and understanding their language, and then translating that and how that translates to design, you'll be a better designer.
I feel like one of the biggest struggles for designers is the notion that we only exist to make things pretty, that we only exist to push pixels around. And that's been the brand that designers have had for a long time. And thankfully that is changing. And that has changed, and it's still changing. There's still a lot of work to do, which is why I feel compelled to have this conversation with you and to share this value with the defenders, because this is going to springboard their design careers even more, especially early on. It took me 20 years. It took me 20 years, honestly, to really care a lot more about this stuff. And again, part of that is just the way the industry has evolved. When I started, it was web design, and it was 1996. And nobody knew what was going on. It was the Wild West, and it was fun. We've matured. We need to put on our big boy and big girl pants now. And thankfully we are. I guess what I'm trying to say is some of the biggest struggles I've had in my design career have been that perception from higher ups, from stakeholders, from executives of, we don't really need you at the table. We don't really need your business ideas, your strategy. Like, we just need you to make this look better. This is a proving ground for us as designers to go, no, we're scientists and we're business people, and then we're designers. It doesn't mean we have to love design less. That's why we do this. But I think our mindset should be, we're scientists, business people, and we're designers too at the same time. I want to encourage the defenders to, wherever they're at right now, like, I know that there's a lot of them who are trying to get their foot in the door, trying to get into a great organization that takes design seriously. But there's also some that are already planted and they're going like, okay, this is great. What do I do now? Like, I've never really cared about the business that much. Let's be honest. I worked in real estate for a long time and I didn't care about real estate. So I feel like I didn't dive as much into the business model and stuff. So would you say, is that like one of the first steps for defenders, is to really, wherever they're at or even where they're going, discover the business model immediately? What are some key steps that they can take first of all?
Answering what the people want you to do is one thing, right? We get this all the time as well. Companies come in, clients come in, and they want it to be pretty. Their stuff is ugly and they want it to be prettier. Most of the times it's their competitors looks better, so now it's a problem.
Sure.
Before they never cared.
Yeah.
And I said, sure, I can do that. I can make it prettier. So I think there's some misunderstanding of our role. I think the word designer paints us in a corner. So I said, sure, we can. In fact, I just had this conversation with a prospect, I would say this week or the last week, where they came in and said, oh, we want you to make these reports prettier. I'm like, sure, I can do that. And is that going to bring you the most value? And I said, the other thing I can do is, I heard that maybe the reports aren't as useful, or maybe the reports aren't answering the questions that the consumers of the reports are asking. So that's, to me, I started to explain what user experience designers do. I said, and I try to use analogies too. The making the report prettier is great. I can do that. That's like, to use analogies, it's like an interior designer. Sure, I can come in and paint and create this look and feel and make it really nice according to your brand guidelines or whatever. Or maybe though the house has a problem, you don't even know it, right? In the sense that I open the door and the first thing I see is the bathroom, and then the kitchen instead of the living room. Those structural things are things that you might need help with. And so we started digging into that a little bit. Then I asked them to prioritize. What is the bigger pain right now? Are the reports not usable, or are they just ugly? So that's the type of conversations I want to foster, is education.
I like that. You just described my house.
No. So you got to get the architect, right?
Oh, man. That's really a great analogy. I think that we're seeing some evolutions too, and what we call ourselves. Like, that's a whole nother episode, right? Like, we could spend hours talking about what we call ourselves and why, but I'm seeing an evolution even where I'm at currently. I have even been corrected by my manager because I would refer to myself as a designer. And then after a meeting, don't say you're a designer, say you're a UX engineer. I'm like, that's interesting. For some reason, when you throw engineer onto the title, you're taken more seriously by the customer, by the executives, by the stakeholders. So it's interesting to see some of that landscape change too. Do you have thoughts on that, by the way?
Yeah, I think the titles go through evolutions. From what I'm seeing, more and more UX designers are calling themselves product designers.
Yes.
Digital products, which is confusing because then there's hardware products.
Right.
But yeah, there were graphic designers at one point, and now they're UX designers, and now
we're engineers,
product designers, and UX engineers. Yeah.
That's great. So as far as understanding the business model, I feel like that is a really great place to start for designers in their organization. What I'm doing adds value, but in order for me to add the most value, I really need to know where the money's made. Is that a good place to start, Pek?
I think so.
Okay.
You have to understand the needs of the business versus the needs of the consumer versus the constraints of engineering and design and whatnot. Yeah.
Okay. And now how do I find that out? Who do I talk to? And what are the best questions to ask?
Sure. In, let's say, a consumer app or something, or a SaaS app, right? How is it sold? How is it priced? How is it the teams that are delivering value and creating value to the clients, the front lines who are selling, they understand what value, because they're talking to the customers, what the customers really value. So understanding that. Talk to the CEO, sales, marketing, within a larger organization, look at their calendar, grab lunch with them. Or if you're sitting in the lunchroom, well, I don't know how, with COVID, it's a little different on Slack or whatever. Grab time with them and see how their roles contribute to the success of the company, and try to piece it all together, how the business makes money, where it spends money. Yeah, so in terms of speaking the design language or using UX terms, is treat each member in the organization as a user, and what is their need, and that's a start.
The theme of the show is fight for the users, and I still believe that's important. I always will believe that it's important because I'm a user, and there's nothing more frustrating than being a user and seeing that a designer has completely neglected your needs as a user of a product, as a user of a service. But also that's evolved too. It's like, okay, fight for the users and the business. Fight for the users, fight for the business. Because if we only fight for the users, then we're out of a paycheck.
The business pays your paycheck.
Exactly. And if we only fight for the business, then we also lose our paycheck because we're not considering the users. So it's that balance. It's that fine balance. So I like that. Yeah, put your pants on and go get on a Zoom call with your CEO or whatever. I've got an interesting question from actually several listeners. It's great. We put it out there and you helped get the word out too. And several listeners asked some questions around this as well. And this is a question from Swetha Ramaswamy. This person said, how can designers influence product/business strategy and quantify their work? That's interesting.
Yeah, you have to talk about the business value of the design, right? It's not about what business problem is this design solving, right? How does the change in design either create more value, i.e. create more money, or save money to the organization, right? If you're talking Pantones, typography, colors, pixels, right? That's a very different conversation than. It reminds me of that really great famous blog post, Jared Spool's blog post, $300 million button.
I love that one.
Yeah, that blog post, if you dig into it, he was consulting for a large e-commerce site, and obviously he simplified it and created a clickbait title, but essentially creating a flow where you can check out as a guest so that you didn't have to register, resulted in $300 million worth of commerce. See, that is very easy to translate. Yes, do more of that design I like. Creating a guest checkout experience. If you're just talking about the value of the flow of the checkout, the prettiness or the design of it versus, hey, this design, I need to do this so that more customers can check out easily without friction, and that'll translate into more money for the business. That's an easy conversation.
That's great. I've told this story before on the show, but ugly wins sometimes. It does. And I am a living proof of that, because when I was working at the real estate company, I was tasked with redesigning our most popular landing page, and it looked like crap. It was just awful. It looked like something straight out of the 90s, out of the origin of the internet. And so I was like, piece of cake. I could beat this, right? Like I could top this. I already gave the spoiler alert. My design looked way better, way more modern. It looked like we were, for the time, like we were a forward-thinking company. And I used all of the same elements. The developers didn't really have to change any of the functionality. I just put a new skin on it. And then my boss was like, all right, let's measure this. Let's A/B test this. And I was like, yeah, no worries. And I just put my feet back preferably sat back, put my feet on the desk, and, waited for the results. And sure enough, this ugly design that had been there from the beginning, obviously, still beat mine. And you just want to go like, why? That's so frustrating as a designer, especially one coming from an agency background where visual design was so emphasized and the importance. And I still believe it's important, but you have to do the research. You have to figure out why. I love quantitative, but it didn't tell me why. It definitely told me that I lost, and that hurt my ego, of course, in a good way. But it never told me why. Why was that other page resonating and affecting? Maybe it was just a friction thing. Maybe there was just one form field. I don't know. We didn't do that research part of it to find out why. I think it's just coming back to that we're scientists before we're pixel pushers. We really do have to measure. How do we know? And that's a question I have here. How do I know that something I designed achieved its business goal? I think that's what I was getting at. How do I know that?
Yeah. So I thought put her last word in the question is like the last point was, how do designers influence and quantify? Well, quantify, that's it. If you can quantify it, that you can justify it, right? Hey, how do we justify this? Let's not even talking about A/B testing features. Let's talk about something more qualitative like brand, right? Let's do a brand refresh. You can test that, right? Like you maybe test how people will feel about the brand when they see this new logo. Maybe, for example, not to call and name out names, I think people had a visceral reaction to the new Airbnb logo at one point. Maybe if they had tested that before and asked people how they felt, maybe they would have decided differently, for example. So even something as subjective as like a brand refresh, I think you can quantify. And then for consumer stuff, you can measure engagement, right? What are you trying to optimize for? Are you trying to optimize for time on site? Are you trying to optimize for likes, notifications, comments? If you have a goal and you design to fix that goal, that you can measure the before and after. So that's what designers need to do, is to then not just design it and throw it over the wall, but design it, get a baseline, design it, try to fix the problem or improve on it, and then follow up to see what did that do.
The trend of teaching children to code is becoming surprisingly popular. Well, maybe not surprisingly. Most of the big tech moguls today started coding as kids, so there's that. WhiteHatJunior.com is the world's best at teaching your children to learn code through play and experimentation. Plus, their unique one-on-one teaching methodology makes it easy to absorb tough concepts because the teacher is able to focus completely on one student. Kids who code have better concentration, logic, grit, math scores, and my favorite, a growth mindset. So give it a shot. Go to userdefenders.com/WHJ to book a free coding class to see for yourself just how easy it is for your child to learn coding. Peter Drucker said, you can't improve what you don't measure.
Yeah, and he's a business guy. And so it's useful having a little bit of a rounded education, not just being hyper-focused on the craft of design and understanding color theory, understanding visual hierarchy. Those are table stakes in my mind. And then the better designer has other tools.
I like that. Yeah.
Has more tools.
More tools in the tool belt. And I think that's really why we're doing this and I'm getting inspired by listening to you answer these questions because I need more tools in my tool belt and I've been working on it. But it really does come down to that. When you go to an interview, say two designers go into an interview for the same job, I'm almost positive, and this is an assumption again, but I have a feeling, let's put it that way, that the designer that comes to that interview that has more tools in the tool belt, especially around business and quantifying their outcomes, their outputs, I think that designer may have more of an edge on landing the role. What say you, Pek?
Oh, absolutely. As an employer of designers and engineers, whenever someone has the perspective and the empathy of more and more people, I think that's better. For example, a design might be great, but if it's hard for an engineer to implement, that's not empathetic to the person that they're working with. So the designer who is aware of the constraints of engineering, that's just an example.
Sure.
The designer might be a great visual designer, but if, to your point, if it didn't solve the problem, if the old quote-unquote ugly design performed better, you didn't accomplish your goal, right? The goal of the designer here is not to make it pretty, but really is in service of the business.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's good. And as someone who has hired a lot of designers for your organization, what do you look for? This is something I'm thinking about right now. Like some of the defenders listening might be like, you just brought up this job interview scenario and more tools in the tool belt. What are you looking for in a designer that you hire around this theme? What do they show you that really makes you go, this is the one, this is the designer that I want on my team?
I think design skills and the tools, the software tools are table stakes. I think we can look at that through their portfolio and stuff. I think their understanding of things, right? Having an understanding of the domain, for example, like if they only live in pixels, but they don't understand the business, that's really hard. You have to start. And then especially if you are doing business, if you service a certain type of customer, having the domain knowledge saves so much time, right? The back and forth communication, the overhead of having to explain why we're doing certain things. So having that domain expertise is really helpful. The other thing is asking questions, right? Are they asking the right questions in terms of asking the why and talking to the right stakeholders, having the understanding of what this thing is trying to accomplish. For example, we design a lot of dashboard software. So understanding what the user is trying to accomplish within that dashboard. Yes, it's about making the dashboard pretty, but everybody who we interview for has to make that dashboard pretty. That's just table stakes. But really, is it solving the problem that the user's coming in for efficiently?
One thought I had too around this as an encouragement, defenders, when you're in an organization, now I'll caveat this with a statement. Growth design is becoming a thing now, one of the newer sort of titles in our field, but for good reason. Because it's focused all around the business aspects and the tangible results from a design effort and a design initiative. So there's a lot of emphasis on what we were talking about, measuring. You can't improve what you don't measure. So there's a lot of emphasis on experiments and measuring everything and seeing the lift, seeing the before, the after, and then presenting that. Again, going back to our facilitation point in the beginning, confidently presenting that information to the higher ups and selling the value of design. That's a real important part of this. So defenders listening, my point is, and this is something that I was able to do at that real estate company, hopefully you work in a place where there's an analytics person or team who are paid strictly for looking at data all day long and looking at opportunities. And then they are the ones who have the answer when you say, hey, I'm really curious, how did my design perform? How did it do against the control? That's how I found out that my design didn't win.
That should be your best friend, right?
Be best friend. Amen to that. Be best friends with that person, with that team. Take them out to lunch. Buy them coffee. And then get in tight with them, because I was in real tight with this person and he gave me the results every time. And what that did for me was I was able to put that into my LinkedIn, into my resume. I was able to produce X amount of lift through my design. And I had the data to show that because of this relationship with my analytics person.
Yeah, because in a large organization, that person can be a bit far removed from you. You typically design. You produce the design, you hand it over to engineering. Engineering, it gets executed, it gets QA, there's testing. At some point, it gets deployed. You as the designer might not even have any clue that it was finally live.
Yeah.
And then the analytics team looks at it. Okay, it performed, it didn't perform. So then they'll throw it back to the product manager at some point that, hey, we need to do this. And then that's when the designer hears, oh, we need to improve this page, but they didn't really understand the why or what happened.
Yes.
Walking over to the analytics person, I think, is a good idea.
I love how you added on to that, because that is critical. Like, it's so often what happens, as you mentioned, we'll design something, we'll hand it off, and never to be heard of again, either because there is no analytics person, or they're not as easily accessible, or we just don't ask. We don't take the time to really pursue that answer. And I think maybe oftentimes it's the latter. Maybe we just aren't asking enough questions. We aren't validating. No one's coming to save us. We need to do this work. We need to get off of our chair. And I know this is different now with COVID. Normally you'd say you'll get out of your chair, walk over to the elevator or whatever, or walk up the stairs or go to the other area of the floor and talk to that person. Still pursue that. I think we need to pursue that until we're asked to shut up, and then maybe we move on if the company doesn't care about that.
And in smaller agency companies and product companies, the analytics might not even be there. So I think it's on if the designer wants to show value and quantify, that stuff needs to be there. So they need to push for that. And then at an agency, for us, we might not even have access to the analytics. That's a common problem. So it's on us to constantly ask or check in. Hey, is this performing? How did it perform? And then we always try to push for access of that if it's possible.
This is a question from Joel Ryerson. Hey, Joel, what's up? He asked, how can designers do a better job communicating the business value of design to non-believing stakeholders? That's an interesting question, and that's a tough one.
Yeah, it is a tough one when people don't necessarily see the value of design. We face that challenge ourselves several times. A lot of the clients that come to us are somewhat successful companies. They were successful without the benefit of design. Usually the prototype, I would say, is a company designed and built by product designed and built by engineers, and it solved a problem and people used it in spite of its problems, and they were able to be successful in spite of it for this long. And then at some point it reaches a bottleneck or plateau, and that's when they feel like, oh, okay, people are complaining, or they hear the feedback, people complain a lot. And that's when they're like, okay, fine, we're going to solve this. And then, okay, go make it pretty. We found a company, go make it pretty.
Yeah.
So understanding the business value, right, is asking the right questions. It's, okay, say we do this. What is the value? What does success look like? Is the NPS score going to get better? Are the reviews going to get better? Are people going to drop off less? Define the success criteria and align it with the business value. If it's just taking a look at the design, what's presented, realizing it's ugly, and then just making it pretty, maybe there's not much value there, or not as much value. It's hard to quantify. That's the thing. It's hard to quantify because it's so subjective. It's so fluffy. But if I can say, okay, how do you know people have a problem with this? Oh, the NPS score is low. Oh, the analytics tell us they drop off here. Or, hey, the time on site is blah. Okay, if I were to improve the design and people engage and stay 50% longer, is this valuable? Would you say this design is successful? Something like that.
Ah, so good, man. In God we trust. All others must provide data.
That's right. It can be qualitative data. It doesn't have to be a number.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the NPS score. It can be a survey.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, Jeff Godoff said qualitative is 180, quantitative is 180. Put them together, you get a 360-degree view of the scenario, of the problem, of what needs to happen. And I really like that. If you have to settle for qualitative only, I think that's good. At least that's something. At least you're finding out the why. I think that's a lot of our struggles is like, why did they do? Like my landing page example. Why did this ugly piece of crap win over my beautiful, elegant Web 2.0 design? So I think that at least you can find out why. And then if you can find out what, even better, get that 360-degree angle view on the problem. This is a great question from Helena Levison. I really like this question. She says, how does a designer get a seat at the round table? First of all, I would want to ask Helena, are you sure you want a seat at the round table?
I was just thinking the same thing. Be careful what you wish for. Be careful
what you wish for. With my previous managers and my current manager, some of the stuff that they have to do in the midst of trying to be an IC, individual contributor, oftentimes they have to just turn that away. They have to just focus only on managing people, only on doing stuff that maybe they would rather not, frankly, be doing so much. It's a big responsibility. Yes, you get a bigger paycheck. Yes, that may be worth it. That may be worth some of the late nights or some of the extra stress, gray hairs or what have you. But man, be careful what you wish for. Like you said, I've had opportunities to lead teams and I've done it. I'm personally pretty happy being an individual contributor. With leadership qualities, with leadership abilities. I think that's, for me, I found my happy place. I could do my work. I can put the headphones on. I can do the stuff that I need to do. I know the problems. I work with people still. I'm not a hermit, but I like just being able to hunker down and just do my work. But we need leaders. This world and this field needs great design leaders. So how does a designer get a seat at the round table?
Before I answer that question, I want to double down on what your words is. Do they really want to?
Yeah.
Right? Because if you enjoy the craft of design, if you enjoy creating beautiful designs, if you enjoy taking an empty canvas and creating something out of nothing, I don't know if being on the leadership team, you'll get to do more of that. In fact, I'm 100% certain you'll do less of that. So it really depends on what you like to do, what you want to do. If you want to get more and more technical, maybe the leadership roundtable isn't for you. If you like mentoring people, even then, you don't necessarily have to be on the leadership team. I think it would behoove anyone to get an understanding of what it's like to be in there. So maybe talking to, if there is no design in the roundtable, maybe talk to the other people, the head of sales, the head of engineering, the head of whatever. Hey, you used to be an engineer, now you're the head of engineering. What do you do right now? What does life look like to you? Are you writing any code? Are you happy?
Yeah, right.
That type of stuff, right? What are your concerns and what's on your mind these days? So try to translate that to what it would happen if you were being the head of the table. So if that hasn't scared you off yet and you still want a seat at the round table, I think it goes to what value am I bringing to my users? And my users are now the other people in the round table. Right? We're zooming in.
Yeah.
What value am I bringing to the business? Again, it's not going to be designer speak, right? I'll use analogies and real life examples. Our head of design, she has a seat at the table. One of our core strengths is design as an agency. So I believe design has to have a seat at the table in our organization. She's not talking about pixels and the beauty of the designs or anything like that. She's talking about the utilization of the team. She's talking about mentorship and coaching. She's talking about resourcing. She's talking about forecasting resources, need, and stuff like that. Everything but the design, but technically she is a design leader. So that's what life looks like for her, and that's what she wants. So if that's what you want, you're doing everything but not design as much. You're leading the designers, you're creating a space for them so that they can be the best they can be. And then you're finding ways to bring value to the other stakeholders and communicate to the other stakeholders in the leadership team.
Hi, I'm Braden Kowitz. I work for Range, and I fight for the users. You're listening to User Defenders Podcast with Jason Ogle.
Oh, that's great. I think you hit the nail on the head with mentoring. If you want a seat at the table, you really have to care about other designers. You really have to care about the people around you. And you start by mentoring. You start by pouring into these folks and trying to meet needs, because that's what a leader is. That's what a leader does. A servant leader is the best kind of leader. So if you like that type of stuff, and again, it's not rocket science. Like you could just hey, how can I help you? I see that you did this way. Hey, did you know that if you tried it this way, this might, etc. It's really investing into the people around you, and that will not poison you, but poise you to get that seat at the table. Because honestly, there's some people, and I'll raise my hand because I've had managers that are managers only. They're not leaders. They're managers and they're dictators. And they were tapped for some reason, God only knows, but they were tapped to lead a team, but they only know how to manage a team. And there's a really big difference. So honestly, and I guess I'm speaking to anybody, I'm speaking maybe to you, Peg, or maybe anybody who is tapping a design leader in their organization. Don't just do it because of seniority. Don't just do it because hiring from within or whatever seems like the logical pick. Make sure that they care about the people and not just themselves, and make sure that their ego is not their amigo.
I love that. I love that phrase. I'm going to borrow that. It's R&D, rip off and duplicate.
There you go.
But you're right. If you put the designer hat on, I mentioned one set of users, which is the round table.
Yeah.
But you're right. There's another set of users. They now become your users, right? Is your designers, is your users. And to borrow the title of your podcast, your role now is you're the user defender of your other designers.
Yes.
So the users of the software you design are no longer your users if you become a design leader, seat at the table.
Oh, I like that.
Your users are the designers that you lead, and then your other set of users are the leadership team.
I really like that a lot. That makes so much sense.
Whom do you serve? If you're the individual designer, you serve the users of the design you're creating. You serve the engineers whose design you have to hand it off. You're serving your project manager. If you shift your role, you have to figure out who you're serving.
Yeah. And like Bob Dylan said, you got to serve somebody, right? But that's so good, man. And empowering. I think that's the other thing. Is you serve them and then you empower them and then you get out of their way. Right?
Yeah, if you're doing your job, you've empowered your people, and if you hired right, they make the right decisions. Yeah.
Love it, man. So this is my last question, Pek. This has been incredible, by the way. I just want to ask you just like final thoughts and your best advice. I always like that question. What's your best advice for designers that are wanting to grow their knowledge and experience much more in the business side of design? Do you have book recommendations, course recommendations, or just lifestyle choices? Anything you can think of that might help our defenders listening really charge ahead with this?
And my advice is what works for me, but maybe some broad advice is consume more information. And I won't be prescriptive as how, because there's different people consume different ways. If you like to read more business books, I, for one, like audiobooks, so I listen to a lot of audiobooks, so Audible and Scribe. One of my colleagues pointed me to Scribe, which is even better than Audible because I consume a lot. Then there's podcasts like User Defenders. And then YouTube, there's so much content. I would say we're close in age, and when we needed information, we'd have to go to Barnes & Nobles and buy that thick Adobe CS4 book and whatever.
Yeah.
And it came with a CD in the back. And that was the information available to us. By the time it came out, it was already out of date.
Yep, that's right.
Whereas now, folks like yourselves are interviewing, the information is much more real time. It's much more current. And people are vlogging on video, on YouTube. They're interviewing people. They're talking about their craft. So you can learn a lot about business, design, or anything on these multiple channels. The other thing is, I would say that is asynchronous information consumption. The other one is more synchronous, one-to-one. That's maybe talking to people, reaching out to people. Like we have conversations with each other, reaching out to mentors, and that doesn't scale as much. If you're a designer, it's very easy to just talk to other designers. So I would encourage you to get out of the comfort zone and talk to the engineers, talk to sales, marketing. Around the time where I really grew a lot in my career was when I joined an agency, but I kind of made it my business to just talk to everyone and just be helpful. So at some point, I started helping the marketing team. They were tapped, so they hit me up to write blog posts. So I started, all of a sudden, the agency's blog posts started coming by me, and I learned how to write. I helped the recruiting team, and they went to different campuses to recruit. So then I started to understand the messaging that the recruiting team had to attract talent to the firm. So I just kind of made it my business. And then I spent some time with the engagement director, who was much more client-facing, and understand their needs and challenges and what being client-facing was like. I just try to make it my business to try to understand more of the different aspects of what made a business.
Such great advice, Pek. Yeah, all the magic happens outside the comfort zone, and the comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there.
I love your little pocketbook of sayings.
I've got so many.
Yeah. But it's the difference between do you want to bake or do you want to run a bakery shop? Right? If you like baking, just keep on baking and getting better at making cakes. But if one day you'd like to run a bakery shop, or maybe not just one shop, but a chain, then you need to have more tools in your toolkit, tool belt.
Yeah, so good, man. Thank you so much, Pek, for taking the time to have this conversation with me. I'm pumped up. This is good stuff. Again, like you and I have been talking about this, like just with COVID and with everything, like all the transitions, I've had several transitions this year. I know you have as well. This has been on our hearts probably since the beginning of the year, if not even slightly before that, actually, to do this. And so this was well worth the wait, my friend. And I know that the defenders listening are resonating with that. And I know they're feeling the same way. There's so much good stuff in here. And I just want to thank you. Thank you again for coming back to User Defenders. I'd like to do this again in the future. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about as well in the future.
Absolutely.
This field changes so much. There's so many things. And I was looking before our conversation, I looked at your show notes on your original episode, again, 3 or 4 years ago. I used to ask this question all the time. I used to say, what does the future of UX look like? And I stopped asking that question because there's only so many guesses that we can make. There's only so many guesses we can make. You said this specifically. You said the future is that this is going to be changing all the time. It's always going to be changing. There's always going to be something new for us to learn and grow into. So I guess with that, I know that we'll have more to talk about in the future. And I just thank you again for being here, Pek. Thank you for all you do for our field, for your designers that are affecting impact and change and outcomes with so many really large organizations that many of us are probably interfacing with. So thank you for doing that. And again, thanks for sharing your wisdom with us today. You know what? Before I do my sign off, I want to ask you, can you tell us the best way to connect and keep up with you? I almost forgot.
Sure. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so just connect with me on LinkedIn, and then Twitter as well. So Twitter, it's just my name, Pek Pongpaet. LinkedIn, I'm pretty easy to find as well. Yeah.
Perfect. I'll put it all in the show notes. Thanks again, man. And last but not least, here it goes. I want to say, fight on, my friend. Jeff Bezos was quoted saying, "I very frequently get the question, what's going to change in the next 10 years? And that is a very interesting question. It's a very common one. I almost never get the question, what's not going to change in the next 10 years? And I submit to you that the second question is actually the more important of the two. Experience design has dramatically changed and matured over the past 20 years, and I'll submit to you that it will continue to. As much as we all tend to loathe it, the only constant is change. We as UX designers, if we desire to stay relevant and taken more and more seriously in our current and future workplaces, must also be willing to change and mature too. I know there's a good percentage of you defenders who are either just getting your foot in the door or desperately trying to. This is also for you. Being armed with this knowledge and gumption, word for the day, from the outset will only make you that much more successful, that much sooner. When I started doing this in the 90s, the main titles we had available to us were web designer or webmaster. Oh, how I'd love to call myself a webmaster again. Our main job and focus back then was to make cool stuff and push the boundaries of this newfangled World Wide Web.
What is internet anyway?
As I mentioned on the outset of this interview, I've wrestled with this for a while now because, frankly, I didn't get into this field to look at spreadsheets, help with business cases, write requirements, and with the expectation that being promoted primarily means getting a seat at the table. And not to get on a tangent, but another design problem we need to eventually solve is, what is the growth trajectory apart from management of an IC at an organization? There ought to be one, and I hope there will begin to be a way forward for ICs who want growth, but don't necessarily want a seat at the round table. But I digress. As I said, it's high time to put on our big boy and big girl pants and take the initiative to understand the business side of design more, to be willing to exchange our design speak for business speak while at the proverbial round table or in a meeting with stakeholders and higher ups, knowing that that's what they will truly relate to much more and what will continue to give us an edge and added value that we're all seeking for ourselves, but also for those who come after us. It's now more than ever our job to build this bridge. This is our proving ground. Will we be hungry and especially uncomfortable enough to add those new tools to our tool belt? Or will we embrace the status quo and possibly drift into potential obsolescence? We as designers have more of a responsibility now as a whole to push the field forward and represent design well, particularly for those newer designers I mentioned who are just getting their foot in the door into a career that will only provide for them if the business sees the tangible value and outcome over output that we're continually adding in order for them to continue to budget appropriately for this important work. And I'll close with this verse from 1 Corinthians 13:11, which says, "When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man or woman, I put the ways of childhood behind me." To your takeaways, Defenders. I'm at User Defenders, and Pek is at Pek Pongpaet. We would love to hear your thoughts around this important episode today. I also want to thank WhiteHatJr.com for making this episode possible. It looks like an awesome product. My son Ben is really interested in coding, so I hadn't actually heard of White Hat Jr. until they approached me with this opportunity. So I'm going to check it out for my son. Check it out, userdefenders.com/WHJ, and book your free one-on-one coding class for your child today. I also want to take a second to give a Patreon shout out to Francesca V. Francesca, thank you so much for jumping on board the Patreon and supporting me and this show. Some of you may be wondering, why does he have sponsorship and Patreon? And it's a great question, because I'll be honest, when I listen to some podcast episodes, the part that annoys me the most is when the host talks about the Patreon. Let me just say, the reason that I still have sponsorships is because there's only 18 patrons of the show, and that's not enough. Many of them are under the $10 range. Actually, most of them are. And so that's not enough to keep the show going. So that's the reason that I still have to have sponsorships as well. So the Patreon really exists primarily as just an added perk. There's video interviews, live, uncut, and ad-free. And there's also an RSS feed for the audio episodes, ad-free, that you get. It's a private RSS feed that you can attach to your pod-catching app. So there's a lot of other things too. You could check all the benefits out. There's stickers, there's one-on-ones with me, there's a community membership, there's all sorts of things. You can check it out if you want at userdefenders.com/Patreon. I want to thank Cesar Limas for the astonishing artwork. You probably haven't heard that name in a while, because he did my art in the early days of the show, and Pek is a repeat guest. So I was able to reuse the awesome art that he did. Check out the full artwork that Cesar did and the show notes over at userdefenders.com/074. You'll also find transcripts there. I don't mention that enough, but there's a transcript there for my hearing impaired Defender friends. Keep tabs on the show, as I've got another episode coming out next month, also sponsored by WhiteHatJr.com. And that one's going to close out the year. And I can tell you this already, I haven't done the interview yet, but I can tell you, just knowing this person, even from afar, it's going to be so good and so inspiring. So I can't wait to close out the year with this next episode. So make sure you stay subscribed at userdefenders.com/subscribe. That's it for now, Defender. Our world and country, if you live in the U.S. like I do, is definitely restless and anxious, and there's just a lot going on, a lot of unrest, and who knows who knows how much more amplified that may or may not be by the time you hear the next episode after our election. I just want to encourage you all. I know you're good people. I know you are. I know you want to make a difference in the world, and so I guess I just want to encourage you, just please be patient with one another. Please continue to love well, even when you feel unloved. That's hard, but it's possible. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hug your loved ones as often as possible. And until next time, fight on, my friends.